And now we'll be presenting the full report about the state of digital investments in MENA. So let's welcome back to the stage Mr. Omar Christidis.
Thank you again for being with us. It's a pleasure to be introducing the State of Investments in MENA report today. This is a report that we've been working on for the past 3 years. We've been collecting data painstakingly from our investors in our network and asking them to give us as much information as possible about the deals that they're doing. I'm thrilled we're thrilled to be collaborating with Dubai Internet City for this report, who are sponsoring this as part of their broader vision to support innovation and entrepreneurship. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Majid Swaidi, Managing Director of Dubai Internet City, Dubai Outsourcing Zone, and our partner in this, to say a few words about why they're sponsoring the report and welcome you. Thank you.
First of all, Assalamu alaikum everyone. It's a pleasure to be standing here today in front of you and trying to basically launching this exciting report that we believe has shed quite a lot of light on the investment life cycle here within this region. It's important that we understand also from one point is that we today as Dubai Internet City look at these opportunities of trying to spread the right word into the market, are very important and very crucial for the development of the whole region's entrepreneurial industry. The report has shown a lot of interesting facts. It has re-emphasized and refocused and revalidated some information that we always knew about, which is that the UAE is playing an important role in the region. And on top of that, it gave us a little bit of a clearer insight or a scientific approach towards what's happening in this industry. We always believed that the industry is one that will grow. Nevertheless, I think what we needed as part of this industry is always the fact that there is a scientific backing towards what we are talking about. There is truth to what's happening, and I think we are breaking the silence by providing more information similar to what the information that is being provided within this report. This report gives us a synopsis, and I'll leave this important fact for Omar later on to talk about. But if we talk about it in general, I think it gives us a very exciting outlook for the years to come. It tells us that the industry is good. Investors are excited and have been investing, and I think the presentation that was done just a few minutes ago showcased that. It gives entrepreneurs the light at the end of the tunnel, especially entrepreneurs starting recently. And on top of that, I think it's very important to understand why, as Dubai Internet City, we are looking at supporting such activities. Because for a very simple reason. Number one, I think the first reason is it is part of an ecosystem that has to be driven and has to be grown. Number two, I think it goes with our strategy for the years to come about how innovation would play an important role for the growth of an industry that a few years wasn't existent in this part of the world. And number three, it re-emphasizes the strategy that was set by the UAE government, the innovation strategy that was set by the UAE government going forward, and to re-emphasize the fact that this is an ongoing story since the launch, since 99, when the launch of Dubai Internet City happened, with His Highness launching basically a knowledge-based economy. And today, where we stand, it only showcases that this fact is happened. And to go ahead and to develop further on his own strategy, on His Highness strategy going forward, it's very important that we support an innovation industry that will only grow and develop even further. not to highlight too much on this report, and I think I'll leave the exciting part for Omar to talk about, but I think let's look at how we can take this information and be able to utilize it in the right way. Excite more entrepreneurs, give them the opportunity to come and develop further on this platform, and hopefully they look at us today as an important player into this area. From support from seed until they grow, until they become hopefully a success stories that everyone is talking about in the region. So we urge everyone to go through these reports and look at these opportunities, but we also urge everyone to be able to come and talk to us in Dubai Internet City and in 5 to be specific, so that we are able to assist at least in this journey going forward. So thank you very much, and I'll leave the floor for Omar for him to highlight a little bit more about the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majid. Thank you for DIC's support and collaboration on this project. Without further ado, the report is based on an aggregation of data that we did across the region. We aggregated 450 deals that took place over the last 3 years. And we surveyed almost 100 investors across the region, or we included almost 100 investors across the region in their research. So the report is divided into 2 sections. The first, which is about the investor community and mapping the investor landscape. And the second is about the deals themselves, where they've taken place, etc. So let's dive right into the investor community. And first you can see there's been a huge uptick in the investor community, specifically at around 2010. That's where you start seeing significant increase. And since 2009 till today, we've had almost 15 times growth in the number of investors in the MENA region. You can see that trend here. The blue bars are the specific numbers launched each year. The line is the cumulative. When we look at where the investors are, the UAE takes the crown. 27% of the investor community is based here in the UAE. The next market is 16% based in Saudi Arabia. Makes sense, one of the largest markets in the region. Lebanon comes in third at 13%, which is driven by Circular 331, the Central Bank of Lebanon's initiative to support and stimulate the startup ecosystem there. And if you'll notice, the market is quite concentrated. The top 5 countries make up more than 75% of the market, or just about 75% of the market. If you look at the ticket size of the different investors, about just over 50% of the investors are investing in early stage deals. And so that's angel networks, seed funds, and accelerators. In terms of those, about a quarter of all investors are accelerators. It's the most common form of early stage investor. And 40% of all of the investors are venture capital investors directly. If we look at how this distribution has changed over time, what we see here very quickly is that actually the accelerators a few years ago made up a larger proportion of the investment landscape. That has been shrinking. As the industry has matured, the need for venture has grown, and so the number has increased from about 15 to about 31% of the market. And so what we're also seeing increase in is growth capital, jumping from about 10% to about 12%. If we look at the number of corporate investors, this is something that we've seen emerge in the last couple of years. Corporate investors are big corporations that are investing strategically through an arm's length a fund that they've set up, or as LPs in some other funds. And so this gives you a sense of the total number of investors and the number of corporate investors, which has gone to about 16 here in the region. Most of the corporate investors are based here in the UAE, and about 25% of them are based in Saudi Arabia. Some of the most active and biggest deals that have been done recently have been done by corporate investors in Saudi Arabia, and those include At-Tayyar's investment in Careem. They led the previous round. It put in about $60 million into Careem. Now we'll dive right into the investment portion. And this we've looked at 450 deals, as I mentioned, and you can see where the distribution of deals pans out. The UAE captured almost 140 of these deals in the last 3 years. And in comparison to the next biggest markets, those are Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, all hovering between 60 and 70. And so that's about half of the number of investments that took place in the UAE. So the UAE is really kind of the largest. Markets to look out for: Tunisia, Palestine, Morocco. These are some of the smaller markets that still have good traction in terms of number of deals. If we look at the value of investment over the last 3 years, we can see that 2014 was a peak year for investment. And 2015, the number of deals was very similar between 2014 and 2015, 182 deals versus 172 deals. But the value of deals was much larger in 2014. And that was really driven by a few very large deals that captured the largest proportion of value. When we look at markets ranked by number of investments to see where is the action moving in the region, what we see first of all is the UAE going from number 2 in 2013 to number 1 in 2014 and staying there. Lebanon making a big jump from 5th place to 2nd place. Jordan staying around 3rd place, and Saudi Arabia staying around 4th place. The biggest kind of loser in this has been Egypt. And they've gone from a 1st place in 2013 to 7th place this year. And that's partly driven by the fact that some of the early stage investment institutions that were in Egypt have been less active in the last few years. Some of the venture capital funds that were very active in Egypt have been less active in the past few years. Many of them are raising new funds to enable them to start investing again. And so we expect that to increase in the future. If we look at the value of investments, UAE is king again, going from 3rd place to 1st. Lebanon also jumping from the 4th to the 2nd place. Is anyone here, who's familiar here with Circular 331? If you'd raise your hand. Okay, just a few people. So one of the reasons why Lebanon has jumped so quickly in the rankings is because the Central Bank of Lebanon launched a $400 million investment guarantee program for commercial banks interested in investing in startups, funds, and accelerators. And so the result is that a lot of money has been pumped into the market, and that has really pushed Lebanon's ranking up, both in terms of number of deals and value of deals. If we look at the number of investments by ticket size, we see that more than 50% of the deals, 50 to 60% of the deals each year are early stage deals. And that seems to be healthy. We need to start the pipeline with a big flow of early stage startups. And then as we get further on, the number of later stage startups shrinks down to around 15 to 20% venture capital and only 2 or 3% growth capital. This is in terms of number of deals. When we look at the value of the deals, the tables are completely turned, right? Most of the value in the region today is being driven by growth stage deals. And we can see in 2014, 80% of the dollars invested were invested in growth stage deals. And that's particularly interesting because we saw that 2014 was a big year for investment dollars. And you can see that here, that was really been driven by growth stage deals. If we look at business models, we tried to classify the startups by business model. Now, this is a little bit tricky because a lot of startups have kind of hybrid business models that they're using. But if we look at the number of deals by business models, we see transactional business models are king. And here what we mean by transactional are anything where there's a good or a service exchanged. And so most of these are e-commerce players, marketplaces, and similar type businesses. The second largest group of investments have been in the media space. About a quarter of all deals took place in media, and those are business models driven by either advertising or content creation or branded content. 20% went into software and software as a service. 14% went into technology, and when we say technology here, we mean hardware or kind of algorithmic data processing type software. And 5% went into agency business models. And we know that venture investors don't like agencies that much because they're not as scalable. Again here, transactional is the largest, and the largest by far, but when we look at the value of deals, the outcome is even more kind of shocking. 72% of all dollars invested in MENA in the last 3 years went to a transactional business. So 72% of all dollars invested in the last 3 years went to an e-commerce site, kind of a marketplace type business. Media only captured 9% of the dollars invested, even though it captured almost 25% of the number of deals. And agencies captured a very, very tiny sliver of the total dollars invested. And we can see this a bit more clearly when we compare the number of deals versus the value of deals for each of these business models. And so you'll see $546 million invested in transactional businesses, 166 deals. We're talking about an average of $3 million per transactional investment. Now, these are indicative because, as we've already said, the majority of the value is being driven by a few large deals. But still, we're seeing the kind of disconnect between that and media, where we saw 120 deals, but only $70 million of investment, so about $500,000 per deal. The only other place where the number of the dollars are larger than the investments is technology. And that's a space that that we think is going to be very interesting with the increased interest in Internet of Things, hardware, with the ability to do innovative hardware becoming much more democratized by 3D printing and cheap computing. We see this space as a space that's going to grow very rapidly in the region. What we also did is we tried to understand, okay, great, now these startups raised money, now what? How many of them are still operational, and how many of them have closed down? And what we found is, of all of the companies that raised money in the last 3 years, almost 20% of those companies have since closed down. This does not seem like a very high rate to us. We were expecting to get much higher numbers than this. The market, people say 80% of startups fail. And while true, this is not a full time horizon for a startup to fail, maybe we should be looking at these numbers after 5 years or 7 years. But about 20% of startups that raised funding in the last 3 years are today closed. And what we did is we said, okay, let's try to compare apples to apples here. Let's only take startups that were founded in 2013 and that raised their first round in 2013, right? And so that way we're comparing all alike. And then we said, how many of those startups then raised a second round of investment? And so about 20% of the startups that raised the first round secured a second round of investment within the 3 years. Only about 11% of those, or only 2% of the companies that raised a first round also raised a third round within the 3-year period. Almost 31% of the startups that raised the first round closed without raising a second round, and about 6% of the companies that raised a second round closed. So this is our approximation of a funnel for taking just the startups in 2013, and we think this gives an interesting picture into the life and death of startups in the Middle East region. Thank you very much. The full report is in your bags. It's available online for download, or will be available for online for download very soon. There's a lot more interesting statistics in the full report. You can find out more information about corporate venture deals. You can find out more information about the gender of founders. We found that about 13% of founders in the region were female. And we looked at that by market. We broke that down further. So there's a lot more specific details about the investment landscape in the report, so I invite you to take a look through those. The other thing is that if you are an investor in the audience, we invite you to share your data with us to continue to make this report a better report, and so that we can continue to give a really comprehensive picture of what's going on in the digital landscape in the region. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Majid and Dubai Internet City, for partnering with us on this, and looking forward to receiving your thoughts and feedback. Thank you very much.